The falling block puzzle game has been a staple of my gaming life for most of my gaming life. In fact, Tetris is just 10 days older than I am. Games like Columns, Baku, Animal, and of course Tetris have claimed many hours of my life. There are still a few falling block games kicking around, games like Luminous, but on the whole it's a genre that has really fallen from grace. The quality of falling block puzzle games simply couldn't justify the price tag anymore. There was no new blood coming into the genre, and everything just felt very played out. I mean, it doesn't really get much better than Baku Animal, does it? Especially not if you have to shell out £25 in the process. But it's a genre that indie developers can very effectively exploit, indie games being little games that don't cost much to make or buy, and don't necessarily have to do much to justify that price tag. And Chains is a great example of how well this all-but-dead genre can work in the modern market. The falling block puzzle game, if you didn't know or, couldn't figure it out, is a puzzle game where blocks, shockingly, fall, and you have to match up particular patterns to make the blocks vanish, which keeps the play area free, to allow more blocks to fall and allow the game to continue. If the play area is filled, it's game over. At least, that's the traditional gameplay structure. It's a genre that, unlike most other computer game genres, requires both thought and dexterity. You need to be able to plan ahead so you can set up combos, and you need to be able to adapt if you don't get the blocks you need. You also need to be able to do this very quickly, as these games get ridiculously fast in the harder levels, which requires some serious finger skills. Again, traditionally. You see, Chains has adopted a different approach. Unlike the traditional block puzzle games, you have no control at all over the things you're connecting in Chains. You can maneuver the tetrominos in Tetris, or the gems in Columns, or the animal heads and delicious food in Baku Animal, but the balls you connect in Chains can't be moved at all. They're instead subjected to a physics engine that makes them tumble and roll around appropriately. Physics is the spine of the game, and it facilitates some pretty fascinating level designs. On one level, your balls are falling down onto either side of a seesaw-like structure, which reacts to the weight of the balls, and if one side becomes too heavy, the thing topples over and you lose your balls. On another level, you have a weighing scale, and each ball has its own weight, and your goal is to eliminate enough balls from each side to make the scales exactly balanced. On yet another level, the balls may fall into a tub that has a bottom connected to a counterweight. If the weight of the balls in the tub is greater than the counterweight, the bottom opens up and the balls fall out, giving that level a novel twist on the traditional time limit. Then again, some levels don't rely on physics at all. There's a great deal of diversity. On one level you might simply be stringing chains together as they fall into a tub with no restrictions, and on the next level you may be charged with creating a chain of a particular length to complete the level. It would be arrogant to say no two levels are alike, but there is enough diversity to make every level sufficiently different to every other, keeping the game fresh throughout all 20 levels. But while 20 levels may sound like a lot, these levels can take you just a few minutes to complete, and at the time of writing I have owned the game for a few weeks, and have replayed the game only for reference while writing this review. So I think it's fair to say the replay value is somewhat limited, especially given the lack of a multiplayer feature. The closest thing there is to an incentive to keep playing is hard difficulty, but even that reaches its limits quite quickly. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's a game you'll only ever play once, but its specific level-based structure gives Chains a diminished natural replay value when compared with the classics. But as I said toward the start of this review, a game with this kind of price point doesn't need to do much to justify itself, and that rule definitely applies to Chains. One of the biggest problems with Chains is that, because you don't have control over your balls, there's a very apparent degree of determinism to it. You're often just going where the developer wants you to go, solving a puzzle, and it's tough to reconcile that feeling with the expectations you'll have playing this genre. And what isn't controlled by the level's design is pretty much down to luck, as you can't really predict where these balls will fall with serious accuracy, making more than a few levels a mixture of hoping and frantic clicking rather than the traditional, time-proven mixture of fast fingers and quick wits. But on the other hand, it's the very fact that you're focused on these other elements of play and the unique to the genre, albeit constricting level designs, that makes Chains such a fresh game. It invokes the feel of classic block puzzle games, while also being pretty much nothing like them, and it's exactly because games like Chains weren't around in the mid-90s that the falling block puzzle game genre all but died out. The game has a very simple visual style, but it's both attractive and wholly appropriate. Every level has a silhouette-like black object, or object set against a vibrant background with some kind of simple pattern, and then the brightly coloured balls. It's no crisis, but it certainly looks better than it needs to look, and the visuals at no point hamper the functionality, which is by far the most important thing. Interestingly, there's actually a colourblind mode too, which is a very considerate addition. I can't say how well it works, but I'm going to assume it's helpful. There isn't much in the way of music, but it's so very listen-toable that it really doesn't matter. I love this genre, and while I admittedly haven't sought out every falling block puzzle game ever released, Chains is definitely the best I've played since Baku Animal. It doesn't do enough to compete with the greats, but that's really not what it's trying to do. This is a small game with small goals, and it absolutely accomplishes them.